You know that specific kind of tension at Christmas dinner? The kind where your aunt asks why you aren't pregnant yet? Or your dad has one too many scotches and starts talking politics? Now imagine that tension, but add $10 million in cash stacked in the safe room, 3 loaded Glocks hidden under the damask napkins on the table, and 20 armed guards watching you chew your turkey. I had spent 3 days planning this perfect family dinner. 3 days of screaming at florists who tried to bring me red roses instead of poinsettias. 3 days of briefing the security team on which guests were allowed to keep their phones and which ones had to check them at the reinforced steel door. 3 days of trying to convince myself that, just for one night, we could pretend to be normal. But in our world, normal is a costume. It's a mask you wear, and it's usually ill-fitting and itchy. My name is Elena. To the world, I am a ghost. I don't have social media. I don't go to the grocery store without a 3-car convoy. To the guests sitting at my table tonight, I am Ladonia, the trophy wife of the most feared man in the Abara Valley. But right now, in this moment, I am just a woman who is incredibly bone-deep tired, and if one more person complains about the dryness of the turkey, I am going to burn this mansion to the ground. The air in the dining room was stifling. Despite the air conditioning humming at a steady 68 degrees, it smelled of roasted pork, expensive cologne, and fear. That's the scent of our life fear masked by luxury. It hangs in the curtains. It seeps into the carpets. I looked down the length of the table. It was a masterpiece of distraction. I had set it with the good china, the Limoges porcelain with the gold rim that I bought in Paris during the year we were hiding out from Interpol. The crystal glasses were Waterford, catching the light from the massive chandelier above and scattering rainbows across the white tablecloth. The centerpiece was a cascading arrangement of winter greenery, holly berries, and white candles, designed to block the line of sight just enough to make conversation intimate, but not enough to prevent the bodyguards from seeing a sudden movement. Everything was calculated. Even the seating chart was a tactical operation. To my right sat El Caiman, my husband's second in command. He was a man who looked like a thumb with a mustache, wearing a suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan but still couldn't hide the bulge of the holster under his armpit. He was currently picking his teeth with a silver fork, a habit that made my skin crawl. To my left was Senator Morales. He was sweating. He always sweated when he came here. He was eating his food too fast, shoveling forkfuls of mashed potatoes into his mouth, as if he thought the plate might be snatched away at any moment. He was the one who ensured the shipping containers at the port didn't get inspected on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays were important days, and at the head of the table sat Julian, my husband, El Santo, the saint. He earned the nickname not because he was holy, but because he decided who went to heaven and when. He looked impeccable tonight. He always did. He was wearing a pale gray guayabera shirt, linen, custom tailored to fit his broad shoulders. The fabric was crisp, unwrinkled, standing in stark contrast to the chaos of the men around him. His hair was slicked back, dark and gleaming under the chandelier lights. He was holding a glass of wine, a 2015 cab, from a vineyard we essentially owned in Napa, and he was staring at it with a look of mild disgust. He hadn't looked at me once since we sat down. Not once. I adjusted the strap of my dress. I was wearing silk, a vintage pattern of gold chains and ropes printed on a cream background. It was elegant, powerful, the kind of shirt that says, "I run this house." I had paired it with dark leather pants, tight enough to look dangerous, comfortable enough to move in if I had to run. My Gucci bag, the one with the distinct green and red stripe, hung over the back of my chair. It wasn't empty. In this life, you never carry an empty bag. Inside, nestled between my lipstick and my compact, was a small pearl-handled .22 caliber pistol. It was a gift from Julian on our 5th anniversary. "For the rats," he had said, kissing my forehead. I took a sip of my water. My hand was steady. It took years of practice to keep your hands steady when your adrenaline is spiking. "The meat is good, Doña Elena." El Caiman grunted, bits of pork flying from his mouth. "Very tender." "Thank you, Kaiman," I said, my voice smooth, polite. The perfect hostess. I had the chef marinate it for 48 hours. 48 hours? Senator Morales echoed, his voice high and nervous. Incredible. Truly incredible. "It's dry," a voice said from the head of the table. The room went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The senator froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Julian placed his wineglass down on the table. It made a sharp clink against the coaster. He didn't look up. He was cutting a piece of pork with surgical precision. "I said it's dry," Julian repeated, his voice low, vibrating through the heavy wood of the table. 48 hours of marinating, and it tastes like sawdust. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment. It was rage, pure, white-hot rage. I had been up since 5 a.m. I had negotiated a peace treaty between the kitchen staff and the security detail because the head guard didn't want the caterers bringing in unverified knives. I had personally inspected every single gift under the 20-foot tree in the living room to make sure the wrapping paper matched the color scheme. I had spent an hour on the phone with our daughter's boarding school in Switzerland, calming her down because she couldn't come home for the holidays due to security concerns code for "Daddy has a bounty on his head this month." I was running on espresso and sheer willpower. "It's not dry, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a warning. "It's perfectly cooked." Julian stopped cutting. He looked up, finally. His eyes were dark, endless pools that usually made men wet themselves. He looked at me with that familiar mix of arrogance and boredom. "Are you contradicting me?" he asked softly. The senator looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. El Kaiman suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. "I am stating a fact," I replied, holding his gaze. "Perhaps your palate is off tonight. Too many cigars." A gasp went around the table. One of the bodyguards by the door shifted his weight, his hand drifting toward his belt. Julian's eyes narrowed. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of the employees. He leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "My palate is fine," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "The pork is dry. The wine is tight. It hasn't breathed enough. Did you open this an hour ago like I asked?" "I opened it 2 hours ago." I lied. I had opened it 20 minutes ago because I had been busy dealing with his mistress calling the house phone. But he didn't need to know that. Not yet. "It tastes metallic," he sneered, pushing the glass away. "Like cheap vinegar. You have one job, Elena. One job. To manage this house. And on the most important night of the year, you serve me sawdust and vinegar." Something inside me snapped. It was a small snap, like a rubber band breaking in a quiet room. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had married 10 years ago. Back then, he was just a driver, a handsome, ambitious driver who promised me the world. He had delivered the world, sure, but he had wrapped it in barbed wire. I remembered the first Christmas we spent together. We were in a tiny apartment in Barrio, Antioquia. We had a plastic tree that was missing half its branches. We ate rotisserie chicken on paper plates and drank aguardiente out of plastic cups. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. We danced to the radio in the kitchen. We were broke, we were dangerous, and we were happy. Now, we were sitting in a fortress that looked like a palace, surrounded by people who would kill us for a promotion, eating food that cost more than my father made in a year, and he was treating me like a negligent waitress. The exhaustion hit me again, heavier this time. It wasn't just the lack of sleep. It was the emotional labor. It was the weight of being the emotional anchor for a psychopath. It was the fatigue of constantly scanning the perimeter, constantly checking the exits, constantly wondering if today was the day the DEA kicked down the door or a rival cartel tossed a grenade through the window. And he was complaining about the wine. "One job?" I whispered. The room was deadly silent. "You?" Could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen 3 rooms away. "Excuse me?" Julian asked. He picked up a cigar from the silver tray next to him, a Cohiba Bahaik. illegal and obscene, and lit it. He blew a cloud of smoke across the table, right into my face. That was it. The smoke was the catalyst. I stood up. I didn't stand up gracefully. I shoved my chair back so hard it screeched against the marble floor, a sound like a banshee screaming. I raised my voice. "One? Job?" Julian looked surprised. He held the cigar midway to his mouth. "Sit down, Elena. You're making a scene." "I am making a scene?" I let out a laugh that sounded a little unhinged. "I am making a scene? You ungrateful, arrogant son of a bitch." The senator made a small squeaking noise. The guards pulled their weapons. I heard the distinctive click-clack of safeties being disengaged. 4 Glocks were now pointed at me. I didn't care. I didn't even look at them. My eyes were locked on Julian. "Put the guns away!" Julian barked at his men, not breaking eye contact with me. "Stand down!" The guards hesitated, then lowered their weapons but kept them in hand. "You think I have one job?" I stepped away from my chair. I walked around the table. My heels clicked on the marble. Click, 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 like a countdown. "You think managing this circus is one job?" I gestured wildly at the room. "I manage your life, Julian. I manage your image. Who do you think laundered the money for the senator's campaign contribution so it looked like a charity donation? Me! Who do you think routed the shipment through Panama when the port in Buenaventura got compromised last week? Me! Who do you think remembers your mother's birthday, your mistress's dress size, and the codes to the offshore accounts because you're too busy playing Godfather to write anything down?" I was shouting now. My voice echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing off the gold-leafed crown molding. "I keep this family alive!" I screamed, slamming my hand onto the table. The silverware jumped. The senator flinched so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. "I keep the heat off your back. I keep the money clean. And I cooked this damn dinner while running a logistics empire from my iPad." I reached the head of the table. I was standing right over him now. In the photo that would later become infamous in the underworld, a security camera still that leaked to the press. This is the moment they captured. Me, standing over the most dangerous man in Columbia, pointing a manicured finger right in his face. My hair was wild, falling over my shoulders. My face was twisted in pure, unadulterated fury. He was sitting there, holding his cigar, looking up at me with an expression that no one had ever seen on El Santo's face before. Shock. "So don't you dare," I hissed, leaning in so close I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Don't you dare talk to me about the wine breathing. If you shout at me again about the turkey, or the wine, or the napkins, I will end you." The threat hung in the air. "I will end you," I repeated, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I will transfer the accounts. I will burn the ledgers. I will leave the gate open for the wolves. And I will leave you with nothing but your dry turkey and your ego." I stood there, breathing hard, my chest heaving. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that has finished ticking but hasn't exploded yet. Julian stared at me. The ash from his cigar fell onto his pristine linen pants, but he didn't notice. He didn't move. He didn't blink. The senator was praying. I could see his lips moving. El Caimán was gripping his fork like a weapon. I waited for the explosion. I waited for Julian to stand up and backhand me. I waited for him to give the order to drag me out. I waited for the violence that was the only language he knew how to speak. But he just sat there, staring. And then he did the one thing that none of us expecting. He took a drag of his cigar. He exhaled slowly, and he placed the cigar in the ashtray. He pushed his chair back and stood up. He towered over me. He was 6'3" of muscle and bad intentions. The shadow he cast swallowed me whole. "Elena," he said. His voice was quiet, too quiet. I braced myself. I moved my hand imperceptibly toward my bag, toward the pearl-handled pistol. If I was going out, I was going out shooting. "You think you run this house?" he asked. "I know I run this house." I shot back, my voice shaking just a little. He looked at the guards. "Leave us." "Patron?" Kaimon asked, confused. Get out! Julian roared. It was a sound like a lion waking up. Everyone! Out! Now! The room scrambled. The senator practically sprinted to the door. The guards holstered their weapons and backed out, closing the heavy oak doors behind them with a resounding thud. We were alone. The Christmas lights twinkled on the tree. The candles flickered. The half-eaten turkey sat cooling on the plates. Julian looked at me. The anger in his eyes was shifting into something else, something darker, something heavier. He took a step toward me. I stood my ground. You warned me, he murmured, stepping into my personal space. You said you would end me. I meant it, I said, tilting my chin up. He looked at my mouth. Then he looked at my eyes. Good, he whispered, and then he dropped to his knees. The silence in the dining room was so absolute it felt heavy, like water filling a lung. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic hiss of the champagne bubbles dying in the crystal flutes and the faint, terrified, frantic beating of my own heart. Julian, El Santo, the man who had once burned a rival's hacienda to the ground because they insulted his mother, was on his knees. He didn't kneel like a man defeated. He didn't slump. He didn't bow his head in shame. He knelt with the same terrifying precision he applied to everything else in his life. His back was straight, his shoulders squared, the expensive linen of his trousers pressing into the cold marble floor without a care for the stains. He looked up at me, his eyes dark and glinting with something that looked dangerously like adoration. It was a look I hadn't seen in years, not since before the money, before the armored cars, before the blood washed away the boy I had married and left this statue in his place. I stood frozen, my hand still hovering near the clasp of my Gucci bag, fingers twitching toward the pearl-handled pistol. My breath was caught in my throat, a jagged shard of air I couldn't swallow. The rage that had propelled me across the room, that had given me the courage to scream in the face of death itself, was suddenly replaced by a profound, disorienting confusion. He reached out. His hand, large and calloused, the knuckles scarred from years of resolving conflicts, moved slowly toward me. I flinched. It was instinct. In our world, sudden movements usually meant pain. But he didn't strike. He took my hand, the one I had just used to slam the table, the one pointing the finger of accusation, and he held it. His grip was firm, warm, and dry. He turned my hand over, exposing the palm, and pressed his face into it. I felt the roughness of his stubble against my skin. I felt the heat of his breath. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if my skin smelled of oxygen and he had been suffocating for hours. You are the only one, he whispered into my palm. His voice traveled up my arm, a vibration that settled deep in my chest. The only one in 10 years who has dared to tell me the truth. I tried to pull my hand away, but he held it fast. Not hurting me, just anchoring himself. Get up, Julian. I hissed, my voice trembling. Stop playing games. The senator is probably calling the police right now. Kaimon is probably arming the perimeter. You kicked everyone out. You look insane. Let them call, he murmured, opening his eyes. They were clear now, the fog of arrogance gone, replaced by a lucid, terrifying intensity. Let them arm themselves. I don't care. Do you know why I was angry about the wine, Elena? Do you know why I said the turkey was dry? Because you're a perfectionist sociopath? I suggested, the adrenaline still making me reckless. He chuckled. It was a low, dry sound. No, because I couldn't breathe. He shifted, resting his weight on his heels, looking up at me like I was a religious icon he had just discovered in the ruins of a church. I sat there, Elena. I looked at Morales, eating like a pig, sweating fear onto my tablecloth. I looked at Kaimon, calculating how much of my territory he could swallow if I choked on a bone. I looked at the guards, wondering which one has been paid off by the Norte del Valle cartel this week, and I felt suffocation. He pressed my hand to his cheek, leaning into it. I felt like I was drowning in. Yes, men. Yes, patron. Of course, patron. The wine is delicious, patron. Lies. All of it. They lie to me to stay alive. They lie to me to get paid. I am surrounded by mirrors that only show me what they think I want to see." He looked deep into my eyes. "And then you stood up. You screamed. You called me a son of a bitch." A small, twisted smile played on his lips. "And for the first time all night, I heard something real. You threatened to end me. And the beautiful thing is, I believe you could." The air conditioning kicked on with a low hum, breaking the spell for a second. I looked down at him, this powerful, dangerous man reducing himself to a supplicant at my feet. It was a trap. It had to be a trap. Julian didn't do vulnerability. Julian did strategy. "Is this a test?" I asked, my voice hardening. "Are you checking to see if I'm loyal? Because if you are, get up and check the bank transfers yourself. I don't have time for theater." "It is not a test," he said, and he sounded tired. Incredibly, mortally tired. "It is a confession." He finally released my hand, but he didn't stand up. He reached into the pocket of his linen trousers. I tensed again, waiting for a weapon, a phone, a signal, but he pulled out a key. It wasn't a car key. It wasn't a house key. It was an old, heavy iron key, rusted at the bow, looking like something that belonged to a medieval dungeon or a monastery. He held it out to me. "Take it," he said. I looked at the key, then at him. "What is this?" "The cellar," he said. "Not the wine cellar, the old cellar, the storm shelter under the guest house." My brow furrowed. "We use that space for storage. Old furniture. Broken exercise equipment. Why are you giving me a key to the storage room, Julian? Is this where you want me to hide the body when you finally kill Morales?" "There are no bodies down there," he said softly. "There is insurance, and there is the truth." He pressed the key into my hand. The metal was cold and rough. "If I die tonight," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "or if I am arrested, or if Kaiman decides he wants to be the big fish, you take this key. You go down there. There is a safe. The code is the date of our first kiss. You remember it?" "November 2nd, I said automatically. "Day of the Dead." Poetic, isn't it? He smiled sadly. "Inside that safe is everything. The real ledgers. The names of the politicians we own in Bogota, the routes the DEA doesn't know about, the locations of the accounts in the Cayman Islands that even you don't have access to." My heart stopped. He was handing me the crown. He was handing me the keys to the empire. This was the end I had threatened him with. He was giving me the weapon I said I would use. "Why?" I whispered. "Why give this to me now?" "Because you are the only one who stood up," he said simply. "You are the only one who isn't afraid of the monster. And that means you are the only one strong enough to hold the leash." He stood up then. The movement was fluid, effortless. He was back to his full height, towering over me again, the shadow returning. But the energy had changed. He wasn't looming over me to intimidate. He was standing next to me as an equal. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I am sorry about the turkey," he said softly. I let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. The absurdity of it all, the guns, the millions of dollars, the death threats, all boiling down to a domestic apology. "It wasn't dry, Julian." "I know," he admitted. "It smelled delicious. I was just angry. I wanted to break something. I didn't expect that something to break back." He leaned down and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hungry, desperate, tasting of cigars and red wine and fear. It was a kiss that claimed me, not as a possession, but as a partner in crime. I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, needing to feel the reality of him. For a moment, the mansion disappeared. The guards disappeared. It was just us, Elena and Julian, against the world. The duality of our existence, the love and the violence crashed together in that kiss, fusing us into something stronger than steel. But peace in our house is a fragile thing. It's a soap bubble floating over a bed of nails. The heavy oak doors burst open. We broke apart instantly. Julian spun around. his hand flying to the small of his back where he kept his personal piece, a custom 1911. I stepped back, my hand diving into my bag, fingers wrapping around the cold pearl handle of the .22. It was El Caiman. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, sweating profusely. He wasn't holding his gun, which was the only reason Julian didn't put a hole in his chest immediately. He was holding a phone. "Patron!" Caiman gasped, breathless. "Patron! Forgive me, but you need to take this." Julian didn't lower his guard. His eyes were slits of black ice. "I told you to get out. I told you I wanted silence." "It's the perimeter, Patron," Caiman stammered, stepping into the room. He looked at the disarray, the overturned chair, the tension in the air, and swallowed hard. "The sensors, the silent alarm at the gate. Who is it?" Julian barked. "Police? Army?" "Neither," Caiman said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's a delivery." "A delivery?" I asked, stepping forward. "It's Christmas Eve. Who is delivering at this hour?" Caiman looked at me, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of Julian, fear of what was outside. "It's a van, Doña Elena. A flower delivery van. Just one. It pulled up to the main gate. The driver got out and ran away into the jungle." Julian cursed. He holstered his gun and grabbed the phone from Caiman. He tapped into the security feed. I moved to his side, looking at the small screen. On the grainy night vision footage, a white van sat idling at our front gate. It looked innocuous, innocent, just a vehicle. But in our world, an abandoned vehicle at the gate is never just a vehicle. It is a message. Or a bomb. "Get the bomb squad," Julian ordered, his voice turning into the cold, mechanical tone of the warlord. "Get the boys to the safe room. Where is Senator Morales?" "He is in the bathroom." "Throwing up," Caiman reported. "Leave him there," Julian said. "If it blows, he provides insulation." He turned to me. The softness of the last few minutes was gone, locked away behind the steel shutters of his eyes. But he reached out and squeezed my hand. One hard, sharp squeeze. "Elena," he said. "The key." I felt the heavy iron weight in my pocket. "I have it. Go," he said. "If the van detonates, they will follow with a breach. They will try to come over the walls, go to the cellar, secure the books, wait for my signal. I'm not leaving you," I said. The words came out automatic, stubborn. "I end you. Remember?" "Not a van." "Elena!" he shouted, the command cracking through the room like a whip. "This isn't a discussion about turkey. Go!" He pushed me toward the kitchen door. Hard. I stumbled, catching myself on the door frame. I looked back. He was already moving, shouting orders into his phone, barking at Caiman, transforming into the monster the world feared. He didn't look back at me. He couldn't afford to. I turned and ran. I sprinted through the kitchen, past the terrified staff who were huddled in the corner praying to the Virgin Mary. I burst out the back door into the humid night air. The smell of jasmine was overpowering, sickeningly sweet. The guest house was 50 yards away, across the perfectly manicured lawn. I ran, my heels sinking into the soft grass, kicking them off as I went. I ran barefoot, the cold dew soaking my feet. I reached the guest house and tore open the door. I didn't turn on the lights. I knew this path by heart. I navigated through the dark living room to the closet in the back hallway. I shoved the coats aside, revealing the false panel in the floor. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the latch. I pulled it up, revealing the concrete stairs leading down into the blackness. The cellar. I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. The metal felt warm now, heated by my grip. I hurried down the stairs, pulling the trapdoor shut above me. The air down here was cool and stale. It smelled of dry earth and old secrets. I pulled the string for the single bulb overhead. The room was small, lined with shelves of forgotten holiday decorations, plastic reindeer, boxes of tinsel, and in the corner, pushed behind a stack of old paintings, was a heavy steel safe. I knelt in front of it. November 2nd, 11:02. I spun the dial. Click, Click, click. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open with a groan. I looked inside. There were the ledgers, leather-bound and thick, just as he had said. There were stacks of hard drives. There was a velvet bag that likely contained diamonds. But on top of the stack, sitting squarely in the center, was something I didn't expect. It was a frantic, handwritten note on my personal stationery. I picked it up. The handwriting was Julian's, but it was messy, hurried. Elena, if you are reading this, I am either dead or in a cell, and you are the only one left standing. You were right at dinner. I am arrogant. I am blind, but I am not deaf. I heard you, and I realized that while I was busy watching the wolves at the gate, I forgot to feed the lioness in my house. The van at the gate is a distraction. I know who sent it. It's not the Norte del Valle, it's Caiman. I found the wire transfer this morning. He sold us out, Elena. He sold us out for the territory. I couldn't tell you upstairs. He was watching. I had to make a scene. I had to make him think I was distracted, weak, fighting with my wife. I had to get you out of the room. By the time you read this, the ambush will have started. Caiman will open the back gates. But he thinks you are just a trophy. He thinks you are hiding. Show him he is wrong. Inside the false bottom of this safe is not just money. It is the master override for the house security, and the detonator for the charges I planted under the east wing last week when I first suspected him. Don't just end me, my love. End them all. Yours, Jay. The paper trembled in my hands. The argument, the dry turkey, the shouting, the kneeling. It was all theater. It was all a play performed for an audience of one traitor. Julian hadn't been insulting me. He had been saving me. He had pushed me away to get me to the safe. He had trusted that I would have the rage to leave and the intelligence to follow the breadcrumbs. A loud boom shook the ground above me. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The attack had started. I reached into the safe and pulled up the false bottom. There it was. A tablet screen glowing with the security grid of the estate, and next to it a small red remote. I looked at the screen. I could see the feeds. I saw the front gate. The van was empty, just as he said, a decoy. But on the back lawn, the lawn I had just run across, I saw them. Dozens of men in black tactical gear swarming over the wall. And leading them, speaking into a radio, was El Caiman. I looked at the dining room feed. Julian was still there. He had overturned the heavy oak table and was crouched behind it, firing his 1,911 at the door. He was alone. He was outnumbered. He was fighting like a demon, but he was pinned down. Caiman's men were flanking him. They were moving through the East Wing hallway. The East Wing. I looked at the red remote in my hand. Don't just end me, my love. End them all. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I wasn't just a logistics manager. I was the finger on the trigger of God. I wiped the tears from my face. I took a deep breath of the stale cellar air. "Merry Christmas, you filthy animals," I whispered. I pressed the button. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a shudder. When I pressed the button, I expected a Hollywood fireball. I expected the ground to crack open and hell to spill out. But deep down in the cellar, insulated by feet of concrete and Columbian earth, the explosion felt less like a detonation and more like a massive heavy object being dropped on the roof of the world. The dust rained down from the wooden beams above me, coating my hair, my silk blouse, and the glowing tablet in my hands in a fine gray powder. The single light bulb swinging overhead flickered once, twice, buzzing like a dying insect, before stabilizing. Above me, the east wing of the mansion, the wing that housed the guest suites, the library, and, crucially, the hallway where Caiman's men had been flanking my husband was gone. I stared at the tablet screen. The feed from Camera 4 East Corridor was just static snow. Camera 5 Library was black. But Camera 1, the wide-angle lens positioned in the corner of the dining room ceiling, was still live. It was a scene from a nightmare painted in high-definition night vision. The blast had blown the heavy oak doors of the dining room off their hinges. Debris splintered wood, chunks of drywall, and the shattered remains of the crystal chandelier littered the marble floor. The air in the room was thick with dust, swirling in the green-tinted glow of the camera feed like fog. And in the center of it all, crouched behind the overturned mahogany table, was Julian. He was alive. He was covered in white dust, looking like a ghost rising from a tomb. His gray linen shirt was soaked dark on the left shoulder blood, black as oil on the screen. He was reloading his 1911, his movements jerky but practiced. Slam, rack, point. He wasn't shooting at shadows. He was shooting at the smoke. Kaiman's men were screaming. I could hear them not through the tablet but through the vents of the house. Muffled, distant cries of pain and confusion filtering down into my bunker. The charges I had detonated had taken out the flank, yes, but Kaiman hadn't committed all his pieces. He was a traitor, but he wasn't stupid. He had kept a reserve force at the front entrance. On the tablet, I saw movement in the foyer, shadows detaching themselves from the darkness. Laser sights cutting through the dust clouds like red vipers. Julian fired twice. 2 shadows dropped, but he was pinned. He was bleeding, and he was alone. I sat there on the cold concrete floor the Pearl handled, 22 heavy in my lap, the tablet glowing in my face. I watched my husband fighting for his life in the ruins of the Christmas dinner I had spent 3 days preparing. A strange, cold dissociation washed over me. The terror was gone. The panic that had sent me running across the lawn barefoot had evaporated, replaced by the icy clarity of logistics. I wasn't a wife watching a tragedy. I was an operator managing a crisis. Think, Elena, I whispered to myself. My voice sounded loud in the small room. You run this house. You know where the skeletons are buried because you dug the holes. I swiped on the tablet, bringing up the master control grid. It was a custom interface Julian had paid a German hacker $500,000 to install. It controlled everything. Lights, locks, climate, audio. I looked at the layout. Kaiman's remaining men, 6 of them, plus Kaiman himself were regrouping in the main foyer. They were preparing to rush the dining room. They had assault rifles. Julian had a handgun and maybe 2 magazines left. It was simple math. He would be dead in 90 seconds. Unless I changed the variables, I looked at the icons on the screen. Lighting, zone, foyer, vac, system, main security, shutters, internal audio, zone. All I tapped security, shutters, internal. In the dining room, Julian suddenly looked up. On the feed, I saw massive steel riot shutters slam down over the windows, sealing the room off from the outside world. He flinched, swinging his gun toward the noise, then realized what was happening. He looked at the camera. He looked right at me. He nodded. He knew I was there. He knew I was watching. But the shutters wouldn't stop Kaiman. They were already inside. I watched the foyer feed. Kaiman was shouting orders, pointing toward the dining room doors. He looked manic, his suit torn, his face streaked with soot. He wasn't the thumb-shaped sycophant anymore. He was a rabid dog who realized he had cornered a tiger. Come on, you bastard, I whispered. I tapped lighting, zone, foyer. On the screen, the lights in the main hall didn't just go out. I set them to strobe mode, a setting designed to disorient intruders. The massive crystal fixtures began to flash violently, on, off, at a rate that induced nausea. The men on the screen stumbled. They shielded their eyes. The tactical advantage of their night vision gear vanished as the strobes blinded them. Then I tapped audio, zone, all. I picked up the small red microphone attached to the console. It was meant for making announcements to the staff, housekeeping to the kitchen, or, "The cars are ready." I pressed the button. My voice boomed through the ruined mansion, amplified by speakers in every room, every hallway, every corner of the estate. It echoed off the marble floors and the high ceilings, a disembodied voice of God. "Kaiman," I said. On the screen, Kaiman froze. He spun around, looking for the source of the sound, his gun sweeping the empty air. "You are making a mess of my floor," I said, my voice calm, magnified, terrifyingly casual. I just had the marble polished. Kaiman fired a burst of rounds into the ceiling speaker. Rat-a-tat-tat. Dust fell, But my voice didn't stop. You think you can take the throne? I continued, watching his men bunch up in confusion. You can't even organize a dinner party. You bought the loyalty of the gate. Guards, but you forgot the house staff. You forgot the chef. And you forgot me. Show yourself, Bruja! Kaimon screamed. I could hear him faintly through the vents, but clearly on the audio pickup of the security system. Come out and die like your husband. My husband isn't dying tonight, I said. But you? You are standing on a heating grate. Kaimon looked down. I swiped to the half-act system, main tab. I found the boiler controls. The system was designed to heat the massive estate during the rainy season. It had an emergency purge function, a safety valve to release excess steam pressure if the boiler overheated. The vent release was located in the foyer floor, right under the main chandelier, right where Kaimon and his vanguard were standing. I didn't hesitate. I didn't flinch. I tapped purge. A massive jet of scalding white steam erupted from the floor vents in the foyer. It was like a geyser. On the screen, it was pure chaos. The white steam filled the camera view, blinding everything. But I didn't need to see. I could hear. The screams were immediate and horrific. It wasn't the scream of being shot. It was the scream of being boiled. The steam cleared after 10 seconds. 3 of Kaimon's men were on the ground, writhing, clutching their faces. Kaimon had jumped back just in time, but he was limping, his legs scalded. Julian! I shouted into the mic. Now! In the dining room, my husband didn't need to be told twice. He heard the screams. He heard the confusion. He vaulted over the overturned table, moving with a speed that defied his injuries. He burst out of the dining room and into the steam-filled foyer. He was a shadow in the mist. He fired bang, bang, bang. 3 shots, 3 bodies stopped moving, but Kaimon was gone. I scanned the feeds frantically. Foyer, clear. Dining room, empty. Kitchen, staff hiding under counters. East Hall, rubble. Where was he? Elena. Julian's voice came through the speakers now. He had picked up a dropped radio from one of the dead men. Elena! Status! Where is he? I lost him, I said, my fingers flying across the tablet switching cameras. I don't see him. He must have retreated to the west wing or the patio. Stay in the cellar, Julian ordered. Do not come out. I will sweep the... He stopped. I saw it on the dining room camera. Julian looked down at his chest. A red dot. A laser sight. It wasn't coming from the foyer. It was coming from the ceiling. The gallery. The second-floor balcony that overlooked the dining room. Above you! I screamed into the mic. Julian threw himself to the side just as the gallery railing exploded in a shower of wood and plaster. Automatic fire chewed up the floor where he had been standing a second ago. I switched the feed to camera 9 upper gallery. There he was, El Kaimon. He hadn't retreated. He had climbed. He was prone on the balcony, firing down into the dining room, pinning Julian behind a marble pillar. You missed, Patron, Kaimon shouted, his voice echoing in the hall. You missed! You're getting old! He fired another burst. Chips of marble flew off the pillar protecting Julian. Julian wasn't firing back. He was out of ammo. I saw him check the magazine, curse, and throw the empty gun across the floor. He was unarmed. He was pinned. And Kaimon had the high ground. Come out, Elena! Kaimon yelled, aiming his rifle at the pillar. Come out and give me the codes and I'll make it quick for him. Or stay hidden, and I'll take him apart piece by piece. I'll start with his knees. I stared at the tablet. I had no more traps. There were no steam vents on the balcony. No shutters to slam. The lights were already strobing, but Kaimon was shielded by the railing. I looked at the safe, the money, the ledgers, the keys to the kingdom. Then I looked at the pearl-handled, 22 inches my lap, for the rats. It was a small gun, a lady's gun. It held 6 shots. It had an effective range of maybe 20 feet. The balcony was 30 feet up. But the guest house where I was hiding, it was connected to the main house by a service tunnel. A tunnel that came out, I swiped the schematic on the tablet. The tunnel came out in the pantry, right next to the kitchen. But there was another exit, a ventilation access hatch. In the hallway behind the gallery, if I stayed here, Julian died. If I stayed here, I survived. With all the money in the world, but I would be the widow of a martyr. I would be alone. I end you, I whispered to the empty room. I didn't mean Julian. Not anymore. I stood up. I kicked off my shoes completely. I grabbed the .22. I shoved the tablet into the waistband of my leather pants. I didn't run up the stairs to the garden. I ran to the back of the cellar, behind the shelves of Christmas decorations. There, hidden behind a dusty plastic Santa Claus, was the heavy steel door of the service tunnel. I hauled it open. It groaned, a rusty, screeching protest. I climbed into the darkness. The tunnel was tight, smelling of mold and damp earth. I crawled on my hands and knees, the pistol clutched in my hand. It was dark, pitch black, but I didn't need light. I knew the layout of this house better than the architect who built it. I paid the bills. I managed the repairs. I knew that the tunnel sloped upward for 50 feet, then turned left. I crawled fast, ignoring the pain in my knees, ignoring the dirt grinding into my skin. Above me, I could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire. Single shots now. Kaimon was toying with him, taking pot shots at the pillar to keep him pinned. Crack. That was close, Julian. Kaimon taunted. The next one takes your ear. I reached the ladder at the end of the tunnel. I climbed, hand over hand, breath tearing at my throat. I reached the top a metal grate. I pushed against it. It didn't move. Panic flared. Had they paved over it? Had I forgotten a lock? I shoved harder, putting my shoulder into it. Come on, come on. It gave way with a clang, falling onto the carpeted floor of the hallway. I pulled myself up, scrambling out of the hole like a spider. I was in the upstairs corridor of the West Wing. The air was filled with dust and the smell of cordite. I was 10 feet behind the gallery entrance. I stood up. I brushed the dust from my silk shirt. I checked the safety on the .22. I walked toward the open doors of the gallery. I could see him. Kaimon. He was lying on the floor of the balcony, his back to me, his rifle trained over the railing. He was so focused on the kill, so focused on the man beneath him, that he didn't hear the woman behind him. Or maybe he just didn't think I was a threat. He squeezed the trigger. Another burst of fire. A cry of pain from below. Julian. That cry tore through me. It wasn't fear anymore. It was cold, hard possession. That was my husband. That was my problem to solve. I walked out onto the balcony. The strobe lights from below cast wild, dancing shadows on the walls. Kaimon, I said. My voice wasn't amplified this time. It was just my voice, human, tired, furious. He spun around, rolling onto his back, bringing the rifle barrel up. He saw me. He saw the wife, the trophy, the decoration. He saw the woman who worried about dry turkey. He smiled. A bloody, triumphant grin. LaDonya, he sneered. You came to watch? He didn't look at the gun in my hand. It was too small, too insignificant. No, I said, raising the pearl-handled pistol. My arm was steady. My breathing stopped. I came to clear the table. Kaimon's eyes widened. He realized, a fraction of a second too late, that the decoration was made of steel. He tried to swing the rifle. I fired. The recoil of a pearl-handled .22 is negligible. It's a snap, not a kick. It doesn't bruise your shoulder like a shotgun or rattle your teeth like a .45. It is polite. It is discreet. But in the echoing cavern of the West, Wing Gallery, the sound was deafening, a sharp cracking period at the end of a very long, very violent sentence. I watched the bullet strike. It didn't hit Kaimon in the head. I wasn't a sniper, and my hands were trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and the terrifying realization that I had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The bullet hit him in the neck just above the collar of his soot-stained suit jacket. He didn't die instantly. In the movies, they fall silent. In reality, they gurgle. He dropped the rifle, his hands flying to his throat, his eyes wide with a sudden, shocking clarity. He looked at me, and the arrogance dissolved into a primal, childlike confusion. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a wet, hacking cough that sprayed crimson across the pristine white wainscoting of the gallery railing. He rolled, he thrashed, and then, with a sickening wet thud, he rolled too far. He went over the railing. I walked to the edge and looked down. Caimán had landed on the overturned dining room table, crashing through the remains of the holiday feast. He lay sprawled amidst the scattered silverware, the broken crystal, and the cold, sliced pork he had complimented only an hour ago. He twitched once, and then he was still. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing down on the house like a physical weight. The strobe lights in the foyer had finally died, likely shorted out by the steam, leaving the ruins of the mansion bathed in the eerie, flickering light of the surviving emergency LEDs and the dying flames of the fireplace. "Elena," the voice came from below. It was rough, strained, and wet. I looked down. Julian was pulling himself up from behind the marble pillar. He was a wreck. The man who had started the evening in a tailored linen suit looking like a god was now covered in gray drywall dust, his shirt torn open to reveal the Kevlar vest he always wore, thank God, but his arm was bleeding freely where a grazing shot had torn the flesh. He looked at the body of his second-in-command on the table. Then he looked up at the balcony. He saw me, standing there in my silk blouse and leather pants, holding the lady's gun he had given me 5 years ago. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just stared, his chest heaving, his eyes locking onto mine across the vertical distance. In that look, there was no El Santo. There was no Patron. There was just Julian. And he looked at me with a terrified awe, as if I were a natural disaster he had somehow survived. "Clear the table," he whispered, repeating my words. The sound carried up to me, ghost-like. I holstered the gun in my bag. My knees suddenly felt like water. The adrenaline was receding, leaving behind a cold, shaking exhaustion. "Is it clear?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "Are there more?" "No," Julian said, limping toward the center of the room, kicking a piece of debris out of his way. "The rest ran when the steam hit. Rats don't like the heat." I turned and walked to the stairs. I didn't run. I walked. One step at a time, holding the railing, focusing on placing my bare feet on the carpet so I wouldn't step on glass. I descended the grand staircase into the foyer. The steam had dissipated, leaving everything slick and dripping. The bodies of the men Julian had shot were huddled near the door, dark shapes in the gloom. I walked into the dining room. Julian was leaning against the sideboard, wrapping a damask napkin around his bleeding arm. When I entered, he stopped. We stood there for a long moment, 10 feet apart, amidst the absolute destruction of our life. The smell was overwhelming cordite, blood, sulfur, and the cloying scent of the expensive wine that was pooling on the floor, mixing with the dust to create a purple sludge. "You blew up the East Wing," he said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact." "You told me to end them," I replied. My voice sounded flat, detached. Shock? I realized. I was in shock. "I did," he nodded slowly. He winced as he tightened the makeshift bandage. "I just didn't expect you to be so thorough." He pushed himself off the sideboard and walked toward me. He moved slowly, favoring his left leg. When he reached me, he didn't hug me. He didn't kiss me. He reached out with his good hand and took my face, tilting it up to the light. He used his thumb to wipe a smudge of soot from my cheek. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I said. "My feet are cold." He looked down at my bare feet, stained with the dust of the cellar and the mud of the lawn. He let out a breath that shuddered in his chest. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "About the turkey?" I asked, a hysterical bubble of laughter rising in my throat. "About the life," he said. He looked around the ruined room. "About the lie. I told you I could keep the walls high enough. I told you the business would never sit at this table." He gestured to Caimán's body. I was wrong. You were, I agreed. I reached up and covered his hand with mine. But you were right about one thing. What? The wine, I said, looking at the shattered bottle of the 2015 cab. It probably was tight. I should have decanted it earlier. Julian stared at me. For a second, I thought he might cry. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a raw, broken sound, sharp with pain and relief, echoing off the ruined walls. He laughed until he choked, clutching his side, and then he pulled me into him. He buried his face in my neck, his weight heavy against me. I held him up. I wrapped my arms around his dust-coated back and held him while he shook. We stood there in the wreckage, the king and queen of a castle made of ash, holding on to each other because there was nothing else left standing. But the night wasn't over. And I was still the manager of this house. I pulled back. I looked at him. The softness was gone from my eyes. Senator Morales, I said. Julian blinked, shifting gears instantly. The warlord flickered back into existence behind his eyes. The bathroom. Is he dead? No, he's a cockroach. Cockroaches survive nukes. Go get him, I ordered. Bring him here. Elena, Julian started. You don't need to see. Bring him here, I repeated, and then get the phone. Call the cleaner. Not the local guys. Call the team from Bogota, the expensive ones. Julian looked at me. He saw the change. He saw the steel that he had predicted was under the balsa wood. He nodded once. Yes, patron. He went to the guest bathroom door, which was miraculously intact, and kicked it open. He dragged Senator Morales out by the collar of his suit. The man was a sobbing mess, his pants wet, his eyes squeezed shut. Please, please, I didn't see anything. Morales blubbered, shielding his face. Julian threw him onto one of the surviving chairs. Morales opened his eyes and saw the carnage. He saw Caimon on the table. He screamed. Shut up, I said. It wasn't a shout. It was the voice I used when the kitchen staff was late. Calm, authoritative, absolute. Morales snapped his mouth shut, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. He saw the dust in my hair. He saw the gun in my bag. Senator, I said, walking over to the sideboard and picking up a bottle of water that had survived the chaos. I unscrewed the cap and handed it to him. Drink. He took it with shaking hands and gulped it down. Here is what is going to happen, I said, pacing slowly in front of him. In 20 minutes, a specialized cleaning crew will arrive. They will remove the refuse. I gestured vaguely at the bodies. They will scrub the floors. They will remove the surveillance hard drives. I can't be here, Morales stammered. The police, the news. The police are not coming, I said, because you are going to call the chief of police right now. You are going to tell him that a gas main exploded in our east wing. You are going to tell him it was a terrible accident, but thankfully, everyone is safe. You are going to tell him that due to the structural instability, no emergency services should approach the main house until our private engineers have secured the site. Morales stared at me. Gas main? Gas main, I confirmed. Old pipes. Very tragic. We will be rebuilding for months. Why would I do that? Morales whispered, glancing at Julian, who was leaning against the wall, watching me with a look of fascinated pride. Because, I said, leaning down so my face was level with his, if you don't, the police will come, and they will find the body of a cartel lieutenant on my dining room table. And they will ask why a sitting senator was having Christmas dinner with a drug lord and a traitor. I paused, letting the implication sink in. And, I added, my voice dropping to a whisper, if that isn't enough incentive, Julian gave me the key to the cellar. I saw the ledgers, Senator. I saw your name. I saw the offshore accounts. I saw the pictures from the brothel in Cartagena. Morales went pale, translucent pale. You have the books? I have everything, I said. I am the memory of this organization. I am the bank. And right now, I am the only thing standing between you and a prison cell, or a grave. I stood up and smoothed my silk shirt. Make the call. Morales fumbled for his phone. He dialed. He spoke the words exactly as I had scripted them. I turned to Julian. He was smiling. It was a bloody, tired smile, but it was real. You? I said, pointing a finger at him. Go upstairs. Shower. Change. Burn those clothes. Put on the red sweater I bought you, the one that makes you look like a dad. The itchy one? He complained, but there was no heat in it. The itchy one, I confirmed. Then go to the safe room and get the gifts. The ones for the staff. We are going to hand them out at the gate when the morning shift arrives. Elena, he said softly, the house is missing a wing. I know, I said, looking at the gaping hole where the library used to be. Through the dust, I could see the first gray light of dawn creeping over the mountains of the Abura Valley. It creates an open concept floor plan. Very modern. He laughed again, shaking his head. He walked over to me, kissed me hard on the mouth tasting of blood and dust, and then limped toward the stairs to obey his orders. The sun rose on Christmas Day. The cleaners from Bogota were efficient. By 7 a.m., the bodies were gone. The blood was scrubbed. The shattered glass was swept. They hung heavy plastic tarps over the missing walls of the east wing, masking the destruction from the road. It looked like a construction zone, not a crime scene. The staff arrived at 8 a.m. They were terrified, of course. They had heard the explosion, but I met them at the gate. I was showered. I was wearing a fresh dress white linen. I had covered the bruises on my arms with makeup. Julian stood next to me, wearing the itchy red sweater. He held a stack of envelopes, Christmas bonuses, triple the usual amount. Gas leak. I told the head housekeeper, handing her an envelope thick with cash. A miracle we survived. Go home to your families. Take the week off. Paid. They took the money. They looked at the ruined house. They looked at Julian's bandaged arm. They knew it was a lie. But in Medellin, a well-paid lie is the truth. They nodded, wished us Feliz Navidad, and left. By 10 a.m., the house was silent. We sat on the front steps of the mansion. The humidity was rising, the air thick and heavy. The jungle buzzed with life, indifferent to the violence of men. I held a mug of coffee. Julian was smoking a cigar. Not a Cohiba this time, just a cheap one he had found in a drawer. So, he said, looking out at the driveway, what now? Now, I said, blowing on my coffee, we rebuild. The East Wing? The business, I corrected. Caimán wasn't working, alone. He didn't have the brains to organize the perimeter breach. Someone funded him. Someone helped him. Julian stiffened. Norte del Valle. Maybe, I said. Or maybe the Cali boys are getting brave again. We need to find out. We need to purge the payroll. We need to change the codes. All of them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy iron key to the cellar. I held it up, the metal catching the morning sun. You gave me this, I said. I did. Julian nodded. You said it was insurance, I said. You said it was for when you were gone. I did. Well, you're still here, I said, but I'm keeping it. Julian looked at the key, then at me. He didn't argue. He didn't demand it back. He understood what the night had cost and what it had purchased. It's yours, he said. It always was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was crushed slightly on one side, likely from when he had tackled the table. I got you something, he said, shyly. Before the turkey incident. I took the box. I opened it. Inside was a necklace. A single, flawless, emerald, deep green like the jungle, set in platinum. It was stunning. It was worth more than the house we had lived in when we first met. It's beautiful, I said. It matched the dress, he shrugged. The one you ruined. I laughed. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I got you something too, I said, but I blew it up. What was it? A humidor, I said. Custom made, cedar. Temperature controlled. He sighed. A tragedy. I really need a good humidor. I'll buy you another one, I promised. With Caimán's share of the profits. He chuckled. draping his arm around me. We sat there in silence, watching the vultures circle high above the valley, waiting for things that were already gone. The photo, the one from the security camera, the one of me screaming in his face, would eventually leak. It would become a legend. La Patrona. They would call me the woman who tamed the saint, the woman who stood in the fire and didn't burn. People would look at that picture and see a domestic dispute. They would see a wife nagging a husband. They would laugh at the caption, "Shout at me again and I'll end you." But they wouldn't know the truth. They wouldn't know that the shout was a code, that the threat was a promise of salvation, that the end wasn't death, it was an evolution. I didn't end him. I ended the version of him that thought he had to be alone. I ended the version of me that thought I was just a spectator. I took a sip of coffee. It was strong. It was good. "Julian," I said. "Yes, mi amor." "Next year," I said, staring at the wreckage of my home. "Next year, we cater." Julian kissed the top of my head. Agreed.